Give us a sense of how BB&T did it. Looking back, and I know you took over from John Allison just right in the middle of the crisis.
Yeah, so it was a very, very interesting time for transition and certainly for everybody. But our transition was well telegraphed and planned, and so we were prepared for it, kind of regardless of the circumstances. BB&T was well prepared for the crisis. Obviously, we didn't, like anyone else, predict a crisis of this kind of magnitude. But we had always been and remain a very conservative institution. That's why we've been around for 146 years. That's why we made it through the Great Depression. We were the only bank in the Carolinas that stayed open the entire process during the Great Depression. So we've always prided ourselves in being conservative and being prepared to weather difficult circumstances. And so I don't say this in a braggadocious way, but just in a way of expressing that's the way we operate. So it should not be too surprising that we did pretty well during the crisis.
So Kelly, one of the things that happened because of the crisis was a lot of new regulations that came into effect from the federal level. And we've heard a fair amount about how that wasn't quite fair to the regional banks, that they were applied across the board. But if you were that conservative, did it really make any difference to you? Because you probably were functioning in a way that was within the regulations anyway.
Well, that's basically right. The regulations in terms of increased capital was not a material issue for BB&T. We were already extremely well capitalized. The consumer protection laws that came about were not a particular change for us. Now, there were changes that were imposed on all the system, some of which were good, some of which were bad, that impacted BB&T as well. But I would say we were not as impacted as some institutions that were operating more on the fringe were.
Well, has that differentiation, has that been fixed now? Because there's been a fair amount of effort up in Washington to try to really give a break, as it were, to the regional banks that it's perceived were not fairly treated.
There has been tremendous progress in the last few months. I will say, in fairness, the current leadership of the OCC, the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, are doing a fantastic job in trying to look back at what was put into place as a result of the crisis. How much of that was good, how much of that was overreaction, what should be changed. And they are methodically making changes, including a nice change yesterday that is, I'd say, putting the level playing field back into place so that banks are being looked at more reasonably now in terms of the actual risk of the organization. What happened out of the crisis was there was a really wide range of risks taken by the banking system, and particularly the non-banking system, the so-called shadow system.
Exactly. And I'd like to ask you about that non-bank situation. We had Dan Tarullo, the former Federal Reserve Governor, on yesterday, and one of the things he said is he has some concern that the non-banks have really taken over a lot of the business, the lending, maybe the riskier lending, and that is not as subject to regulation. Are you competing a lot with non-banks as a practical matter in your business?
Yeah, well, I would say Governor Tarullo is right. I served with him for 4 years on the Federal Advisory Council, and he's a very smart guy. So it's very interesting. I've been in the business 46 years, so I've seen a lot of changes. When I first started lending money in the early 70s, banks in this country made over 80% of all the loans that were made. By the time we went into the crisis, that share of market was down to about 30%. So 50% of all the loans as we headed into crisis were made by non-banks, the so-called shadow banking system. And so a major cause of the crisis was that shadow system was out of control. It was unregulated. It had inadequate capital, inadequate liquidity. And frankly, people didn't understand the risk that system was taking. So now I know that what happened after the crisis was that everybody blamed the banks, but that was really not totally fair.
Well, Kelly, then walk it forward for me. What do you think the next crisis for the financial system is?
Well, I hope there's not one, but I think there will always be corrections. A free enterprise system, allowed to exercise itself properly, will always have some excesses which will require some corrections. That's a healthy thing. It's kind of like all of us, generally have the freedom to eat what we want to eat, and some of us almost always eat a little too much, and we have to go on a diet. And so economies are like that. So there will be some normal kind of corrections. But in all honesty, I do not predict at this point a major crisis as far as I can see. in the financial services system.
Yeah.
There are risks. I don't mean to imply that they're not. But look, the banks today have over twice the capital, twice the liquidity that we had before. And so for people that are watching, they should know that the financial system is extraordinarily safe.
Right. And Kelly, finally, I'm very mindful of the fact that you're based in North Carolina, and we have something called Florence that's got a beeline for North Carolina. Give us a sense anticipating what that might do to your customers and your business itself.
Well, it's potentially going to be extremely devastating. It has the prospects of being worse than we've seen in 50 or 60 years. And recall that just 2 years ago, Hurricane Matthew came through eastern North Carolina and was a tragic event. We still have people living in FEMA trailers. So this is going to be devastating for our area. Even if the wind storms or speeds are not so bad, the amount of rain deluge is going to just be awful. So we're preparing for the worst, hoping for the best, praying for the best. We've always taken disasters very seriously. We have tractor-trailer loads of water and necessities ready to go. The minute the storms hit, we will bring in huge amounts of supplies to help our people, our associates, our clients, our communities, because this is a big deal. We need the entire country's thoughts and prayers.